The blood-soaked letter trembled in Eleanor Miller's hands as she stood on the dusty main street of Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory. 1878, the last words from her murdered family and the final nail in the coffin of her former life. The sun beat down mercilessly, much like the hardships that had followed Eleanor since leaving Philadelphia 3 months ago. Her once fashionable traveling dress was tattered and stained, her chestnut hair falling from its pins, and her green eyes, once bright with optimism, now held the vacant stare of someone who had seen too much. "Poor thing," whispered a woman passing by. "Heard her whole family was killed by Comancheros on the way here. She's been half out of her mind since. Too broken to be of any use," replied her companion. "Dr. Hoffman said she hasn't spoken a word since they brought her in, just stares and trembles." Eleanor heard them, as she heard all the whispers that followed her through town. She simply lacked the strength to care. The letter, delivered by a sympathetic Army scout who'd found it on her brother's body, contained the last words her father had written before the attack. Before the massacre that had left her the sole survivor, hiding beneath their overturned wagon as her family's screams filled the desert air. At 22, Eleanor was alone in a savage land, damaged in ways that went far deeper than the healing scar across her shoulder, or the nightmares that prevented her from sleeping more than an hour at a time. Fort McDowell wasn't much more than a dusty main street with a handful of wooden buildings on either side, a general store, a saloon, the doctor's office where she'd spent her first week, and Mrs. Prescott's boarding house where Charity had secured her a small room. The military fort that gave the settlement its name stood half a mile away, offering protection to the handful of homesteaders, traders, and prospectors brave enough to carve out a living in Apache territory. Eleanor folded the letter and tucked it back into her pocket. She needed work. Mrs. Prescott's charity wouldn't last forever, and despite the darkness that had settled in her soul, Eleanor had no intention of dying. Surviving was all she had left. "Miss Miller," called a voice from behind her. "Miss Miller, do wait." Eleanor turned to find Mrs. Prescott hurrying toward her, one hand holding her skirts above the dusty street, the other clutching a piece of paper. "There you are, dear," Mrs. Prescott said, slightly winded from her rush. "I've been looking all over. A notice just went up at the general store." She thrust the paper toward Eleanor. "The Ingram Ranch is looking for a housekeeper. It's respectable work, pays fair wages, and comes with room and board." Eleanor took the paper, scanning the neat handwriting. The Rocking Eye Ranch, 5 miles outside of town, needed someone to cook, clean, and maintain the household. She had done such work in Philadelphia after her mother died, caring for her father and brother. "Isaiah Ingram runs that place," Mrs. Prescott continued. "His father built it up from nothing, and when the old man passed 2 years ago, Isaiah took over. He's a good man, quiet sort, but fair. Keeps to himself mostly, which is why he needs help, I expect." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You should go see him tomorrow," Mrs. Prescott urged, "before someone else takes the position." That night, Eleanor packed her meager belongings, the spare dress she'd been given by the doctor's wife, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and the blood-stained letter. Sleep eluded her as usual, her mind replaying the sounds of gunfire and screams, the smell of blood and gunpowder. Morning came with merciless brightness. Eleanor borrowed Mrs. Prescott's ancient mare, a gentle beast named Daisy, and set out for the Rocking Eye. The desert landscape stretched in every direction, beautiful in its harsh simplicity. 5 miles wasn't far, but the heat made it feel like 20. The ranch appeared on the horizon, a modest house with a large barn and corral. Several cowboys worked with cattle in the distance. As she approached, Eleanor noted the well-maintained buildings and the neat vegetable garden alongside the house. Whoever Isaiah Ingram was, he ran an orderly operation. She dismounted awkwardly, tying Daisy to a hitching post. Approaching the door, Eleanor found herself hesitating. She hadn't spoken a word since the attack. Would this man even hire someone who couldn't or wouldn't talk? The decision was made for her when the door swung open. A tall man filled the doorframe, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides. He wore simple clothing, denim pants, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing sun-darkened forearms marked with old scars. His face, partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, bore the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep but gentle, like distant thunder. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Frustration and shame washed over her. Instead, she fumbled in her pocket and produced the notice Mrs. Prescott had given her. The man studied it, then looked back at Eleanor with piercing blue eyes. "You're here about the housekeeper position?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "I'm Isaiah Ingram. This is my ranch." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please come in out of the heat." The interior of the house was cool and neat, if somewhat Spartan. A large main room served as both parlor and dining room, with a kitchen visible through an open doorway. Everything was clean but clearly maintained by a man who had little interest in decorative touches. "Have a seat." Isaiah gestured to a chair at the wooden table. "Can I offer you water?" Eleanor nodded, grateful. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Isaiah filled a glass from a pitcher and set it before her, then took the seat across the table. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his neck. "Mrs. Prescott mentioned someone might be coming," he said after she'd taken several sips. "You're Miss Miller, correct? Eleanor Miller?" She nodded again. "Mrs. Prescott also mentioned you've had difficulties. That you don't speak." His direct approach was neither pitying nor judgmental. "That doesn't trouble me, so long as you can do the work." Eleanor met his gaze, surprised. "I need someone to cook meals, keep the house in order, and do laundry. Wages are $15 a month plus room and board. Sunday afternoons off unless there's a cattle drive or roundup. Then all hands are needed." He leaned back in his chair. "Think you can manage that?" Eleanor nodded firmly. The terms were fair and she was capable of such work. "Have you done household work before?" he asked. She nodded again. Isaiah seemed to consider her for a long moment. "The men eat at the bunkhouse mostly, except for my foreman Curtis, who sometimes takes meals here. I've got 7 men working for me now, all decent sorts." He paused. "Your room would be upstairs. It's small but private." Eleanor took another sip of water, using the moment to study this man. Isaiah Ingram appeared to be in his early 30s, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the scar that ran from his right temple to the corner of his mouth. His hands were calloused and strong, but they moved with a controlled gentleness as he traced a pattern on the table's worn surface. "I should warn you," he continued, "ranch life isn't easy. Days start before dawn and end long after dark. Weather turns dangerous quick out here. And we're in Apache territory, though we've had no trouble in over a year." The mention of potential danger didn't frighten Eleanor. After what she'd survived, little could. "If you want the position, it's yours," Isaiah said finally. "You can start today if you'd like." Eleanor nodded and extended her hand across the table. Isaiah seemed surprised by the gesture but took her hand in a firm handshake. "Welcome to the Rocking Eye, Miss Miller." Isaiah showed her to a small but clean bedroom upstairs. It contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a wash basin. The window overlooked the corral and the mountains beyond. "The men won't bother you," he assured her. "They know I don't tolerate disrespect." Curtis will be back from town later today. I'll introduce you then." He paused at the doorway. "I'll be working the north pasture. Make yourself at home." After he left, Eleanor unpacked her few belongings. The silence of the house wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest glimmer of security. She explored the kitchen, finding it adequately stocked but poorly organized. Someone, Isaiah himself, presumably had been attempting to keep things in order with limited success. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves and set to work. By late afternoon, she had reorganized the kitchen, prepared a pot of hearty beef stew, and baked a loaf of bread using the supplies at hand. The physical work felt good. Focusing on mundane tasks kept the memories at bay, if only temporarily. The sound of horses announced the return of the ranch hands. Through the window, Eleanor watched as they dismounted, dusty and tired from a day's work. Isaiah was among them, his tall figure easily recognizable. Minutes later, the door opened, and Isaiah entered with another man, shorter but powerfully built, with graying temples and a weathered face. "Miss Miller, this is Curtis Hayes, my foreman," Isaiah said. Curtis nodded politely. "Madam." Eleanor acknowledged him with a nod. "Miss Miller is our new housekeeper," Isaiah explained. "She doesn't speak, but that doesn't mean she can't hear, so mind your manners." "Yes, sir," Curtis replied, no hint of mockery in his tone. He sniffed the air appreciatively. "Something smells mighty fine." "Miss Miller's been busy," Isaiah said, glancing around the now orderly kitchen. "Seems we've been living like savages compared to this." Eleanor gestured to the table, indicating they should sit. She served them bowls of stew and slices of fresh bread, then poured coffee. The men ate in companionable silence for a while before Curtis spoke. "Best meal I've had in months, Miss Miller. Mr. Ingram here can wrangle cattle better than any man I know, but his cooking could kill a man." Isaiah's lips twitched. "I never claimed to be a cook." "No, sir, you didn't," Curtis agreed with a chuckle. "And now we know why." After dinner, Curtis excused himself to check on the men at the bunkhouse, leaving Eleanor and Isaiah alone. "Thank you for the meal," Isaiah said as she cleared the dishes, "and for putting the kitchen to rights. Place hasn't been properly kept since my father died." Eleanor paused in her work, looking at him questioningly. "He built this place," Isaiah explained, understanding her silent query. "Started with nothing but a land claim and 10 head of cattle. By the time he died, we had over 300 head and one of the most respected brands in the territory." Pride and sadness mingled in his voice. "He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching, horses, and treating people fair." Eleanor nodded, returning to her washing up. "I should warn you about one thing," Isaiah said after a moment. "I get nightmares sometimes. If you hear noise in the night, don't be alarmed. It's just me fighting old battles that can't be won." Eleanor turned to look at him, recognition in her eyes. He met her gaze steadily, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. "I was in the war," he said quietly. "Saw things no man should see. Did things no man should have to do. Some nights those things come back to haunt me." Eleanor dried her hands and reached for the notepad and pencil she'd spotted on a shelf. She wrote quickly, the pencil scratching across the paper, "We all have ghosts that follow us." Isaiah read her words and nodded slowly. "That we do, Miss Miller, that we do." The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor rose before dawn to start breakfast, usually simple fare of biscuits, bacon, and coffee. Isaiah would join her in the kitchen as the sky began to lighten, typically with a quiet "morning, Miss Miller," before taking his place at the table. They rarely spoke, or rather, Isaiah rarely spoke, and Eleanor never did, but the silence between them was comfortable. After breakfast, Isaiah would outline the day's work. sometimes asking Eleanor to prepare extra food for men working distant pastures, or to have dinner ready later if they were moving cattle. Eleanor spent her days cooking, cleaning, and keeping the household in order. She took to mending Isaiah's clothes as well, noticing the neglected tears and missing buttons. The first time she presented him with his shirts, neatly folded with repairs nearly invisible, Isaiah had looked at her with such genuine gratitude that Eleanor felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. As weeks passed, Eleanor began to notice things about Isaiah Ingram beyond the obvious. How he always removed his hat and boots before entering the house, regardless of how tired he was. How he left wildflowers on the kitchen table sometimes, saying only, thought they might brighten the place. How his voice, usually controlled and even, would crack slightly when he spoke of his father. She learned that Isaiah had fought for the Union during the Civil War, enlisting at 18. That he'd returned home wounded in body and spirit 4 years later, only to find his mother had died while he was away. That he'd helped his father build the Rocking Eye into what it was today, determined to create something lasting from the wreckage of war. She also noticed how the ranch hands respected him not from fear, but from genuine admiration. Isaiah was firm but fair, never asking men to do work he wouldn't do himself, always ensuring they were properly fed and housed. One evening, as summer heat gave way to the first hints of autumn coolness, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the corral. She hurried around the house to find Isaiah attempting to break a magnificent black stallion. The horse was fighting fiercely, rearing and bucking as Isaiah clung to its back. "That's it, boss," called one of the ranch hands. "Show him who's master." The horse gave a particularly violent buck and Isaiah was thrown, hitting the ground hard. Eleanor gasped, dropping the laundry basket as she rushed forward. The stallion reared again, hooves dangerously close to Isaiah's head. Without thinking, Eleanor vaulted the corral fence and placed herself between Isaiah and the horse. The ranch hands shouted warnings, but Eleanor's focus narrowed to the frightened animal before her. She extended her hand slowly, making soft, clicking sounds with her tongue. The stallion's ears flicked forward, his wild eyes fixing on her. Eleanor remained perfectly still, maintaining eye contact, her hand outstretched. Gradually, the horse lowered his head, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. "Miss Miller," Isaiah's voice came from behind her, tense with concern. "Step back slowly." Eleanor ignored him, taking a careful step toward the horse instead. The stallion snorted but didn't retreat. Another step, and she was close enough to touch his velvet nose. The horse allowed it, trembling slightly beneath her fingers. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered Curtis from outside the corral. Eleanor continued to stroke the horse, running her hand up his face to scratch behind his ears. The stallion's eyes half closed in pleasure. "Never seen anything like it," said one of the cowboys. "That devil's thrown every man who's tried to ride him." Isaiah appeared at Eleanor's side, moving carefully so as not to startle the horse. "You have a way with him," he said quietly. "Have you worked with horses before?" Eleanor nodded without taking her eyes off the stallion. "He's yours if you want him," Isaiah said. "No use to me as a cow pony if he won't be broke, but he seems to like you well enough." Eleanor turned to look at Isaiah, surprise evident in her expression. "Consider him payment for saving me from getting my head kicked in," Isaiah added with a slight smile. "What will you call him?" Eleanor considered the magnificent animal, then lifted her hands to spell out a name. "Shadow," Isaiah read. "Shadow, it suits him." That night after dinner, Isaiah lingered at the table longer than usual, watching as Eleanor wiped down the kitchen counters. "Where did you learn to handle horses like that?" he asked. Eleanor dried her hands and reached for the notepad she now kept in her apron pocket. My father raised horses in Pennsylvania before we came west. He taught you well, Isaiah said. Shadow's a fine animal, strong bloodlines. With proper training, he could sire some excellent stock. Eleanor wrote again. Why give him to me? Isaiah considered her question. You connected with him. That's rare, a bond like that. He paused. Besides, everyone should have something that's truly theirs. I have nothing to give you in return. You've given plenty, Isaiah replied. This house hasn't felt like a home since my father died. Now it does. Eleanor studied him, noticing how the lamplight softened the scar on his face, how his eyes, usually guarded, held a warmth that made her chest tighten inexplicably. Thank you. You're welcome, Eleanor. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made something flutter in her stomach. That night, Eleanor lay awake longer than usual, replaying the day's events in her mind. For the first time since the attack, she had acted without thinking, driven by something other than mere survival. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating. She was drifting toward sleep when a shout jolted her fully awake. Another cry followed Isaiah's voice, raw with terror. Eleanor threw off her covers and hurried down the hall to his room, hesitating only briefly before opening the door. Isaiah was thrashing in his bed, sheets tangled around him, his face contorted in anguish. No, he cried. Fall back, they're flanking us. Eleanor approached cautiously, remembering his warning about nightmares. She gently touched his shoulder. Isaiah's eyes flew open, wild and unseeing. His hand shot out, gripping Eleanor's wrist painfully tight. Who goes there? He demanded. Eleanor placed her free hand on his cheek, forcing him to focus on her face. Gradually, awareness returned to his eyes. Eleanor, he whispered. I'm sorry. He released her wrist immediately, shame crossing his features as he saw the red marks his fingers had left. Did I hurt you? She shook her head, sitting on the edge of the bed. The war, he explained unnecessarily, voice ragged. Shiloh, we were surrounded, cut off from our regiment, so many died. He passed a hand over his face. Been a while since it was this bad. Eleanor reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I usually keep it together better than this, Isaiah said, embarrassment evident in his tone. Must be getting soft in my old age. Eleanor raised an eyebrow at him, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. 34 isn't old, he asked, a hint of his normal self returning. She shook her head, then stood and went to the wash basin, returning with a damp cloth. Gently, she wiped the sweat from his brow. Thank you, Isaiah murmured. You should go back to bed. I'm fine now. Eleanor hesitated, clearly unconvinced. Really, he insisted. Go on. She nodded and moved toward the door, pausing to look back at him. Isaiah had already settled back against his pillows, but his eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling. Good night, Eleanor, he said softly. She closed the door quietly behind her, returning to her own room. Sleep was a long time coming that night. The following day brought an unexpected visitor to the rocking eye. Eleanor was hanging laundry when she spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of Fort McDowell. Soon, a buggy came into view, driven by a well-dressed man. Isaiah emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as the buggy pulled up to the house. Dr. Hoffman, he greeted, extending his hand to the visitor. What brings you out this way, Mr. Ingram? The doctor replied, shaking Isaiah's hand. Just making rounds to some of the outlying homesteads. Thought I'd stop and see how Miss Miller is faring. Eleanor tensed at the mention of her name. Dr. Hoffman had been kind to her after she'd been brought to Fort McDowell, treating her physical wounds with gentle efficiency. But he'd also been the one to pronounce her suffering from severe shock and to suggest she might never recover her speech. Miss Miller is doing quite well, Isaiah said, glancing at Eleanor. "She's been with us almost 2 months now." "Indeed, Doctor." Hoffman turned to look at Eleanor, professional assessment in his gaze. "And has there been any improvement in her condition?" Before Isaiah could answer, Eleanor approached, nodding a greeting to the doctor. "Miss Miller," Dr. Hoffman said, removing his hat. "You're looking much better than when I last saw you. Has your voice returned?" Eleanor shook her head. "I see." The doctor's tone held a note of resignation. "I feared as much. Trauma of that magnitude often leaves permanent damage." "Miss Miller communicates just fine," Isaiah said, a defensive edge to his voice. "She writes when necessary, but mostly we understand each other without words." "That's commendable, Mr. Ingram," Dr. Hoffman replied, "but you must understand the reality of her condition. The mind, once broken in such a way, rarely mends completely." Eleanor felt her chest tighten at his words. Broken. That's how they all saw her back in town. Damaged goods. A curiosity to be pitied. "With all due respect, Doctor," Isaiah said, his tone cooling noticeably, "I disagree with your assessment. Miss Miller runs my household more efficiently than I ever could. She's trained a stallion none of my men could get near. She's smart, capable, and as far as I can see, not broken in any meaningful way." Dr. Hoffman seemed taken aback by Isaiah's vehemence. "I meant no offense, of course. I'm simply speaking from medical experience." "Some things can't be measured by medical science," Isaiah replied. "Would you care to come in for coffee, Doctor? Miss Miller makes the best in the territory." The doctor glanced between them, clearly reassessing something. "Thank you, but I should continue my rounds, perhaps another time." After the doctor departed, Isaiah turned to Eleanor. "I apologize if I spoke out of turn. The way he talked about you, it wasn't right." Eleanor shook her head, indicating no apology was necessary. She reached for her notepad. "Everyone in town thinks I'm broken." Isaiah read her words and frowned. "They're wrong." "Am I not? I can't even speak." "There's different kinds of broken, Eleanor," Isaiah said quietly. "Some can be fixed, some can't, and some don't need fixing at all." He met her eyes steadily. "I've known men who could talk for hours but had nothing worth saying. And I've known others who said more with a look than most say in a lifetime." Eleanor stared at him, something warm unfurling in her chest. "Besides," he added with a half-smile, "if you're broken, then so am I, and most everyone else I know." "What did you mean when you told the doctor we understand each other without words?" Isaiah considered her question carefully. "I meant that I've never had an easier time communicating with anyone, words or no words. You see things others miss. You understand what needs doing without being told." He paused. "And sometimes I swear you know what I'm thinking before I do." Eleanor felt herself blush, dropping her gaze to the ground. "Come on," Isaiah said gently. "Those clothes won't hang themselves, and I've got cattle to tend." That evening, Curtis joined them for dinner, bringing news from town. "Army's sending a patrol through next week," he reported as they ate. "Lieutenant Carson says they've had reports of renegade Apache in the hills north of here." Isaiah frowned. "Thought most of them were on the reservation now." "Most are," Curtis confirmed, "but there's always a few who refuse to surrender their way of life. Can't say I blame them entirely." Eleanor glanced between the men, concern evident in her expression. "Don't worry, Miss Miller," Curtis assured her. "We haven't had trouble here in over a year. The lieutenant's just being cautious. Still," Isaiah said, "we'll take extra precautions. No one rides alone until we know more, and Eleanor stays close to the house." Eleanor bristled slightly at being included in the protective orders, but she understood the reasoning. The memory of her family's massacre was never far from her mind. Later, after Curtis had left and the dishes were done, Isaiah lingered in the kitchen doorway. "I'm heading to town tomorrow," he said. "Need to order supplies and meet with a cattle buyer. Would you like to come along?" "Might do you good to get away from the ranch for a day." Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't returned to Fort McDowell since taking the position at the Rocking Eye. "You don't have to," Isaiah added quickly. "Just thought you might want to visit Mrs. Prescott or pick up some things for yourself." Eleanor considered for a moment, then nodded. "Good," Isaiah smiled. "We'll leave after breakfast." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Eleanor dressed in her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and spent extra time pinning up her hair. She frowned at her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin. 2 months of good food and hard work had filled out her once gaunt cheeks, but she was hardly a beauty. When she came downstairs, Isaiah was waiting, dressed in clean clothes with his dark hair still damp from washing. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made Eleanor's pulse quicken. "You look nice," he said simply. They rode to town together, Eleanor on Shadow and Isaiah on his sturdy bay gelding. The journey passed pleasantly, with Isaiah pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the early days of the ranch. Fort McDowell had grown slightly since Eleanor had last seen it. A new building was going up at the end of the main street, and there seemed to be more people about. "Town's growing," Isaiah commented as they rode in. "Railroad's supposed to come through next year. That'll change everything." They tied their horses in front of the general store, and Isaiah helped Eleanor dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected shiver through her. "I need to see about those supplies and meet with Mr. Goodwin about the cattle," Isaiah said. "Would you like to come with me, or would you prefer to look around on your own?" Eleanor gestured toward the general store, indicating she'd like to do some shopping. "All right." Isaiah reached into his pocket and pressed some money into her hand. "Get whatever you need. Meet me at the hotel dining room for lunch at noon." Eleanor nodded, surprised and touched by his generosity. As Isaiah walked away, Eleanor entered the general store, breathing in the familiar smells of coffee, tobacco, and dry goods. The shopkeeper, Mr. Watkins, looked up from where he was measuring fabric for a customer. "Be with you in a moment, madam," he called. Eleanor browsed the shelves while she waited, noting items the ranch needed as well as a few personal desires: decent writing paper, a hairbrush, perhaps some material for a new dress if Isaiah's money stretched that far. "May I help you, miss?" Mr. Watkins asked, approaching after his customer left. Eleanor pointed to various items, and the shopkeeper gathered them efficiently. As he wrapped her purchases, the bell over the door jingled, and 2 women entered, the same ones Eleanor had overheard gossiping about her months ago. "Oh my," said one in a stage whisper. "Isn't that the Miller woman, the one who lost her mind after her family was killed?" "Indeed," replied her companion. "Heard Isaiah Ingram took her in as his housekeeper. Charitable of him, considering." "Considering what?" asked the first woman. "Well, she's damaged goods, isn't she? Too broken to be of much use to anyone normal. Can't even speak, poor thing." Eleanor felt her face burn with humiliation. She kept her eyes fixed on the counter, wishing she could disappear. "That'll be $3.42, Mr. Watkins said, pointedly ignoring the gossiping women. Eleanor handed over the money, grateful for the shopkeeper's discretion. "Would you like these delivered to the ranch, Miss Miller?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, relieved she wouldn't have to carry everything. "Very good," Mr. Watkins said. "I'll have my boy bring them out tomorrow." Eleanor thanked him with a nod and turned to leave, steeling herself to walk past the whispering women. As she approached, they fell silent, offering insincere smiles. "Good morning, Miss Miller," one said with exaggerated politeness. Eleanor acknowledged them with the barest nod and continued toward the door. As she reached for the handle, it opened from the outside, and Isaiah stood there, his tall frame blocking the doorway. "Eleanor," he said, surprised. "I was just coming to find you. Goodwin rescheduled for this afternoon." His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in her flushed face and the two women behind her. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor nodded quickly, not meeting his eyes. Isaiah looked past her to the women, who were now pretending great interest in a display of canned goods. "Mrs. Daniels, Mrs. Hawkins," he greeted coolly. "Gossiping about my housekeeper again, are you?" The women looked up, startled. "Mr. Ingram," Mrs. Daniels sputtered. "We were just—" "I know exactly what you were just doing," Isaiah interrupted. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd find someone else to talk about. Miss Miller has suffered more than most people could endure, and she's shown more courage and dignity than anyone I know." His voice remained even, but there was steel beneath the politeness. "She deserves respect, not pity or gossip." The women had the grace to look embarrassed. "Of course, Mr. Ingram," Mrs. Hawkins murmured. "No offense meant." "Perhaps not," Isaiah replied, "but offense was given nonetheless." He turned to Eleanor. "Shall we go to lunch? I believe we're done here." Outside, Eleanor stopped him with a hand on his arm, shaking her head in silent reprimand. "What?" Isaiah asked. "They were being cruel." Eleanor reached for her notepad. "You shouldn't have done that. Now they'll talk more." "Let them," Isaiah said dismissively. "What they think doesn't matter to me. It will make things harder for you in town." Isaiah's expression softened. "Eleanor, I don't give a damn what those women or anyone else thinks. They don't know you. They don't see what I see every day." "And what do you see?" Isaiah took a deep breath, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I see a woman who survived the unimaginable, who works harder than most men I know, who communicates more clearly without words than most people do with them." He paused. "I see someone who makes my house a home and who—" He hesitated, then finished quietly, "who makes me look forward to coming home each day." Eleanor stared at him, her heart hammering in her chest. "Come on," Isaiah said, offering his arm. "I'm starving, and the hotel makes a decent beef stew." The hotel dining room was nearly empty when they arrived, most of the lunch crowd having already come and gone. They were seated at a table near the window, and a waitress promptly brought coffee. "Mr. Ingram," she greeted with a warm smile. "Good to see you in town." "Hello, Betsy," Isaiah replied politely. "This is Miss Miller, my housekeeper." "Madam," Betsy nodded to Eleanor. "What can I get you folks today?" "2 bowls of beef stew and some of that cornbread if you have it," Isaiah ordered. As they waited for their food, Eleanor gazed out the window at the busy street. Fort McDowell was growing, but it was still a small, insular community where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. "I apologize if I embarrassed you back there," Isaiah said after a while. "Sometimes my temper gets the better of me." Eleanor shook her head, pulling out her notepad. "Thank you for defending me. No one has done that in a long time." Isaiah's expression darkened. "They're wrong about you, Eleanor. You know that, right?" She didn't respond. "The things they said about you being broken, being damaged, they're wrong." His voice was low and intense. "What happened to you was terrible, unimaginable, and if you never speak another word for the rest of your life, that doesn't make you broken. It just makes you different." Eleanor felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Everyone carries scars," Isaiah continued, unconsciously touching the one on his face. "Some are just more visible than others." Their food arrived, interrupting the moment. They ate in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After lunch, Isaiah had business at the bank, so Eleanor decided to visit Mrs. Prescott. The kind widow welcomed her warmly, ushering her into the parlor and insisting on serving tea. "You look well, dear," Mrs. Prescott said, studying Eleanor's face. "Ranch life agrees with you, it seems." Eleanor smiled and nodded. "And how is Mr. Ingram treating you?" the older woman asked, a knowing twinkle in her eye. Eleanor wrote quickly on her notepad, "He is a good employer, fair and kind." "Just an employer, is he?" Mrs. Prescott pressed gently. "I saw the way he looked at you when you came into town together." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. She shook her head firmly. "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Prescott said, clearly unconvinced. But a blind woman could see there's something there, on his side at least. Eleanor changed the subject, asking about news in town. "Well, there's talk of Apache trouble again," Mrs. Prescott said, sobering. "Nothing specific, just rumors. The Army's taking it seriously, though." She sipped her tea. "And the railroad surveyors were through last month. They say the line will definitely come through Fort McDowell next year." They chatted, or rather, Mrs. Prescott chatted, and Eleanor listened and wrote occasional responses until it was time to meet Isaiah. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Mrs. Prescott pressed a small package into her hands. "A gift," she explained. "Something pretty for a young woman who deserves nice things." Eleanor unwrapped the package to find a beautiful mother-of-pearl hair comb. She looked up, eyes shining with gratitude. "Don't look at me like that," Mrs. Prescott said gruffly. "It's just gathering dust here. Besides, every woman should have something beautiful, especially when there's a man worth looking beautiful for." Eleanor hugged the older woman tightly, then slipped the comb into her pocket and hurried to meet Isaiah. They left town as the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill and the rocking eye came into view, Isaiah reined in his horse. "Home," he said simply. Eleanor looked at him sharply. It was the first time she'd thought of the ranch as home, but she realized with surprise that it had become exactly that. Not just a place of employment or shelter, but home. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of raised voices. Pulling on her robe, she hurried downstairs to find Isaiah and Curtis in intense conversation. "How many?" Isaiah was asking. "At least a dozen raiders," Curtis replied grimly. "Hit the Peterson place before dawn, burned everything, ran off their stock. Casualties. Tom Peterson and his oldest boy were killed. His wife and the other children are at the fort. Army's organizing a patrol." Isaiah noticed Eleanor in the doorway. "I'm sorry we woke you," he said. "There's been trouble." Eleanor nodded, indicating she'd heard. "Apache," she wrote on her notepad. "Looks that way," Curtis confirmed. "Renegades, not reservation Indians." "The Peterson place is 15 miles east of here," Isaiah said. "Too close for comfort. We need to be prepared." "I've already told the men," Curtis said. "They're checking weapons and ammunition." "Sam's keeping watch from the North Ridge." Isaiah nodded. "Good. Double the night watch and no one works the far pastures until this is resolved." "Yes, sir," Curtis replied, heading back outside. Isaiah turned to Eleanor, his expression grave. "I won't lie to you, this could be serious." Eleanor wrote, "What can I do to help?" "Stay close to the house," Isaiah said. "Keep a rifle nearby. You do know how to shoot, don't you?" Eleanor nodded. Her father had insisted both his children learn, believing it an essential skill on the frontier. "Good," Isaiah said. "Let's pray it doesn't come to that." The next several days passed in tense anticipation. The men worked closer to the ranch house, always with rifles nearby. Isaiah spent long hours on horseback, patrolling the boundaries of his property. Each night, guards were posted, and everyone slept lightly, if at all. Word came that the Army patrol had found and engaged the Apache raiders, killing several and driving the rest into the mountains. The danger seemed to pass, and gradually, the ranch returned to its normal routine. Until the night Eleanor woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding. The acrid scent was unmistakable. Grabbing her robe, she rushed to the window. The barn was ablaze, flames leaping high into the night sky. Dark figures moved in the firelight and gunshots echoed across the yard. Eleanor's mind flashed back to the night her family died, the fire, the screams, the terror. For a moment, she was paralyzed. Then Isaiah's voice, shouting orders, cut through her panic. Moving swiftly, Eleanor pulled on her dress and boots. She grabbed the rifle Isaiah had left for her and checked that it was loaded. Taking a deep breath, she opened her bedroom door and peered into the hallway. It was empty. Isaiah's bedroom door stood open, his room vacant. He would be outside, organizing the defense. Eleanor moved to the top of the stairs, listening intently. The gunfire had become sporadic single shots rather than volleys. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Eleanor raised her rifle, then lowered it as Isaiah rushed in, supporting a wounded ranch hand. "Get him to the sofa," she wrote quickly, showing the note to Isaiah. Isaiah nodded, helping the injured man to lie down. "It's not as bad as it looks, Jeb," he assured the cowboy. "Just a flesh wound." Eleanor examined the injury. A bullet had grazed the man's side, leaving a bloody furrow but not penetrating deeply. She motioned for Isaiah to apply pressure while she gathered medical supplies. "There are at least 10 of them," Isaiah reported as she worked. They set the barn on fire as a distraction, then attacked from the east. Curtis and the boys have taken cover behind the corral. They've got them pinned down for now. Eleanor finished bandaging Jeb's wound and wrote, "What's your plan?" "Hold them off until dawn," Isaiah replied grimly. "The Army patrol should reach us by then. Lieutenant Carson promised to check on us today." A crash from the kitchen interrupted them. Isaiah spun around, rifle raised, as 3 Apache warriors burst through the back door. Everything happened at once. Isaiah fired, hitting the lead warrior in the chest. The second warrior loosed an arrow that embedded itself in the wall inches from Eleanor's head. The third rushed Isaiah with a knife. Eleanor raised her rifle and fired without hesitation. The warrior with the bow staggered backward, then collapsed. Isaiah grappled with the knife wielder, their struggle knocking over furniture. Eleanor frantically reloaded, but before she could fire again, Isaiah gained the upper hand, driving his own knife into his attacker's throat. For a moment, the house was silent except for their ragged breathing. Then gunfire erupted outside again, closer this time. "They're making another push," Isaiah said, checking his rifle. "Stay here with Jeb." "No," the word tore from Eleanor's throat, startling them both. Her voice was rough from disuse but unmistakable. Isaiah stared at her in shock. "Eleanor." "No," she repeated, the word coming easier this time. "Not alone." Isaiah's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "Together then," he said, handing her more ammunition. "Watch the back door. I'll cover the front." They positioned themselves to defend the house, each covering an entrance. Outside, the gunfire intensified, then gradually tapered off. Dawn was breaking when a shout went up from Curtis. "Army's here. Boss, the Army's here." Isaiah moved cautiously to the window, then relaxed visibly. "It's over," he said, turning to Eleanor. "They're retreating." Eleanor sagged against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Isaiah crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the weapon from her and setting it aside. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Eleanor clung to him, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. "You spoke," he murmured into her hair. "You actually spoke." Eleanor nodded against his chest. "Yes," she whispered, the words still strange on her tongue. Isaiah pulled back slightly to look at her face, his eyes filled with wonder. We all thought you might never." "So did I," Eleanor admitted, her voice gaining strength with each word. Isaiah brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "Why now? Couldn't let you go alone," she said simply. "Too dangerous." A smile spread across Isaiah's face, not the restrained half-smile she was accustomed to, but a full, radiant expression that transformed his features. "You're incredible, Eleanor Miller. Absolutely incredible." Before she could respond, the door opened, and Curtis rushed in, followed by Lieutenant Carson and several soldiers. "Everyone all right?" Curtis asked, taking in the bodies on the floor and Jeb on the sofa. "We're fine," Isaiah replied, reluctantly releasing Eleanor. "Jeb took a bullet, but he'll live." "They hit 3 ranches simultaneously," Lieutenant Carson reported. "Looks like they were after horses and cattle. We drove most of them north into the mountains." "Any other casualties?" Isaiah asked. "The Wilsons lost their foreman," Carson said grimly. "And the Mitchell place was burned to the ground, though the family escaped." "Thank you for getting here when you did," Isaiah said. "Just doing our job, Mr. Ingram," the lieutenant replied. "We'll help you clean up and post a guard for a few days just to be safe." The aftermath of the attack kept everyone busy. The barn was damaged but not destroyed, thanks to the quick action of the ranch hands. 2 cowboys had sustained minor injuries besides Jeb, and one of the horses had been killed. All things considered, the rocking I had been fortunate. Eleanor worked alongside the men, bandaging wounds, preparing meals, and helping with repairs. Her voice returned gradually, first just a few words, then short sentences. By the end of the day, she was speaking more freely, though still quietly. That evening, after the soldiers had departed, leaving 2 men behind as guards, Isaiah found Eleanor sitting alone on the porch, watching the sunset. "May I join you?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, moving over on the bench to make room for him. "How are you feeling?" Isaiah settled beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Tired," Eleanor admitted, "but lighter somehow." "Your voice is getting stronger," he observed. "It feels strange, like using a limb that's been asleep for too long." She looked at him curiously. "Does it sound different than you imagined?" Isaiah considered this. "I never really imagined a specific sound," he said honestly. "But now that I hear it, I can't imagine it any other way. It suits you." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from gold to deep purple. "You saved my life today," Isaiah said finally. "That Apache would have killed me if you hadn't shot his companion." "You've been saving me since I arrived," Eleanor replied softly. "Seemed only fair to return the favor." Isaiah turned to look at her directly. "What do you mean?" Eleanor gazed out at the darkening landscape, gathering her thoughts. "When I came here, I was empty, just going through the motions, surviving but not living." She paused. "You gave me purpose, a home. You saw me as whole when everyone else saw only broken pieces." "You were never broken, Eleanor," Isaiah said, his voice low and intense. "Wounded, yes. Grieving, yes. But not broken." "I felt broken," she admitted, "like something essential had been shattered inside me, something that could never be put back together." "And now?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Now I think perhaps the pieces are finding their way back together, different than before, but whole in a new way." Isaiah reached out hesitantly, taking her hand in his. "I'm glad," he said simply. They remained there until the stars emerged, hand in hand, content in each other's company. The next morning, Eleanor came downstairs to find Isaiah already at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling before him. He looked up as she entered, a smile warming his features. "Good morning," he greeted. "Morning," she replied, moving to the stove to start breakfast. "How did you sleep?" "Better than expected," Eleanor said, mixing biscuit dough. "No nightmares." "That's good," Isaiah said. "I thought you might have trouble after yesterday." Eleanor turned to face him, wiping flour from her hands. Yesterday was different from before. This time I could fight back. Isaiah nodded in understanding. Makes all the difference. As Eleanor prepared breakfast, she found herself humming softly a lullaby her mother used to sing. It had been so long since music had felt natural to her that she didn't notice until Isaiah commented. "That's pretty," he said. "What is it?" Eleanor stopped, surprised at herself. "Just an old song my mother used to sing," she smiled. "I haven't thought of it in years. Would you sing it?" Isaiah asked. "The words, I mean, if you remember them." Eleanor hesitated, then began softly. "Hush, my child, and sleep tonight. The stars are keeping watch till light. Dream of fields and summer skies, till morning sun bids you arise." Her voice, still rough from disuse, cracked on the higher notes, but the simple melody filled the kitchen with warmth. "That's beautiful," Isaiah said when she finished. "Your mother had a gift." "Yes, she did," Eleanor agreed, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. "She was always singing or humming, even when times were hard. My father used to say she could charm the birds from the trees with her voice." "You take after her then," Isaiah said. Eleanor laughed, a sound neither of them had heard before. It transformed her face, lighting her eyes and softening the lines of sorrow that had become so familiar. Isaiah stared at her, transfixed. "You should do that more often," he said when he found his voice. "What?" Eleanor asked, turning back to her biscuits. "Laugh. It suits you." The day passed in a flurry of activity as they continued repairs from the attack. The Army patrol departed, having determined that the Apache raiders had fled the area. Life at the Rocking I began to return to normal, with one significant difference: Eleanor now spoke freely, her voice growing stronger each day. That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table going over accounts, Isaiah brought up a subject that had been on his mind. "The railroad's coming through next year," he said, setting aside his ledger. "Fort McDowell's going to grow, change." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Mrs. Prescott mentioned that when I visited her." "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch," Isaiah continued. "Buying more land to the north, increasing the herd. With the railroad, we can ship cattle directly to markets in the east." "That sounds like a good plan," Eleanor said. "The Rocking Eye has excellent stock. There would be demand." Isaiah nodded, fidgeting with his pencil. "Thing is, expansion means more work, more hands, more everything." "You're up to the challenge," Eleanor assured him. "Maybe." Isaiah took a deep breath. "But I'd need help, not just ranch hands, but a partner, someone to share the load, share the dream." Eleanor looked at him curiously. "Curtis is practically a partner already." "Not that kind of partner," Isaiah said quietly. He set the pencil down and met her eyes directly. "Eleanor, I'm not good with words, never have been, but these past months, having you here, it's changed everything." Eleanor felt her heart begin to race. "Isaiah, please, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "When you first came here, people said you were broken beyond repair, too damaged to be of use to anyone. I didn't believe that then, and I certainly don't believe it now." He reached across the table to take her hand. "But even if it were true, even if you were broken into 1,000 pieces, I would still want you here, because I would love each and every piece." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Eleanor Miller," Isaiah said simply. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you communicate with a look or a gesture. I love watching you with shadow and how you've made this house a home." He squeezed her hand. "And I'm asking if you might consider making it your permanent home, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "Isaiah, she began, her voice catching. "You don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden, and if you don't feel the same way, I understand. Nothing would have to change. You could stay on as before." Eleanor shook her head, squeezing his hand tightly. "No," she said firmly. "I don't need time to think about it." Isaiah's face fell. "I see. I'm sorry if I know," Eleanor interrupted, laughing through her tears. "That's not what I meant. I meant I don't need time because I already know my answer. Yes, Isaiah, yes, I'll marry you." Isaiah stared at her in disbelief, then broke into a radiant smile. He stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her face. "Absolutely sure." "More sure than I've been of anything in my life," Eleanor replied. "I love you, Isaiah Ingram, with all my broken pieces put back together." Isaiah cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "You are perfect exactly as you are," he murmured, then lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Eleanor wound her arms around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Well," Isaiah said, a hint of wonder in his voice, "that settles it." Eleanor laughed again, the sound becoming more natural each time. "Indeed it does." They were married 2 weeks later in Fort McDowell's small church, with Mrs. Prescott, Curtis, and the ranch hands in attendance. Eleanor wore a new dress of pale blue, with Mrs. Prescott's mother-of-pearl comb in her hair. Isaiah, unaccustomed to formal clothes, looked both handsome and uncomfortable in a new suit. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Isaiah kissed Eleanor with such tenderness that several of the women, and at least one ranch hand, were seen wiping away tears. The celebration afterward at the Rocking Eye was a joyous affair, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. As the evening wore on, Isaiah and Eleanor slipped away from the festivities to stand on the porch, looking out at the land that was now truly their home. "Happy?" Isaiah asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "Completely," Eleanor assured him, leaning against his solid strength. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Isaiah admitted. "When I came back from the war, I never imagined I could feel this way again, whole, at peace." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "We heal each other," she said softly. "Your broken pieces and mine fitting together to make something new." "Something better," Isaiah agreed, kissing her forehead. "Something perfect in its imperfection," Eleanor added. As winter gave way to spring, the Rocking Eye prospered. With the money from a successful cattle sale, Isaiah purchased additional land to the north, expanding the ranch's boundaries. Eleanor, no longer just a housekeeper but a full partner in the enterprise, took over the accounts and began breeding horses, starting with Shadow. One evening in early summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eleanor turned to Isaiah with a mysterious smile. "I have news," she said. "Oh," Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Good news, I hope." "The best," Eleanor confirmed. "Dr. Hoffman visited today while you were out with the herd." Isaiah immediately looked concerned. "Are you ill?" "No," Eleanor laughed. "Quite the opposite." She took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Isaiah's expression transformed from concern to astonishment to pure joy in the span of seconds. "A baby," he whispered. "You're sure?" "Dr. Hoffman is," Eleanor confirmed. "He says the baby should arrive in early winter." Isaiah whooped with delight, lifting Eleanor from her chair and spinning her around. "A baby!" he exclaimed. "Our baby," Eleanor laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Yes, our baby. Now put me down before we both get dizzy." Isaiah complied but kept his arms around her. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you so much, Eleanor Ingram." "And I love you," she replied, stretching up to kiss him. "Always." The news of the baby spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Mrs. Prescott immediately began knitting blankets and tiny clothes. Curtis, to everyone's surprise, carved a beautiful wooden cradle. The ranch hands, all of whom had come to respect and adore their boss's wife, built an addition to the house, a proper nursery with large windows to catch the morning sun. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, the same women who had once whispered about her being broken now stopped her in town to offer advice and congratulations. Eleanor accepted their newfound friendliness with grace, neither holding grudges nor forgetting who had stood by her when it mattered. On a cold, clear night in December, with snow dusting the mountains in the distance, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy boy. Isaiah paced outside their bedroom as Mrs. Prescott and the doctor attended his wife, his face lined with worry. When the baby's first cry pierced the night, Isaiah sagged against the wall in relief. Moments later, Dr. Hoffman emerged, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Ingram," he said, extending his hand. "You have a fine son and your wife is doing well." Isaiah shook the doctor's hand absently, already moving toward the bedroom door. "Can I see them?" "Of course," Dr. Hoffman replied. "They're waiting for you." Inside, Eleanor sat propped up in bed, her face tired but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, lay a tiny bundle with a shock of dark hair. "Isaiah," she said softly as he approached, "come meet your son." Isaiah sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the small, perfect face. "He's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled instinctively around his father's calloused thumb. "Strong, too. He takes after his father," Eleanor said, smiling. "What shall we name him?" Isaiah asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. "I was thinking of James," Eleanor suggested. "After my father, James Ingram." Isaiah tried the name out. "It's a good, strong name." "James Isaiah Ingram," Eleanor amended. "After the two best men I've ever known." Isaiah looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's perfect," he agreed. "Just like he is, just like you are." Eleanor shook her head fondly. "Not perfect, just whole, finally whole." As the years passed, the rocking eye grew and prospered. The railroad came through Fort McDowell as promised, bringing growth and opportunity. Isaiah's vision of expansion became reality, and the Ingram brand became known throughout the territory for quality stock. Eleanor's horse breeding program flourished as well. Shadow sired a line of exceptional horses known for their intelligence and spirit. The Ingram horses became as sought after as their cattle. James grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's gentle spirit. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Rebecca, who from an early age showed signs of having inherited her mother's way with horses. On the 10th anniversary of the day Eleanor first arrived at the Rocking Eye, she and Isaiah stood on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. The ranch had changed: more buildings, more hands, more of everything, as Isaiah had predicted, but its heart remained the same. "Do you ever think about it?" Isaiah asked quietly. "How far we've come?" "Every day," Eleanor replied, leaning against his shoulder. "From broken pieces to this." Isaiah pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I told you back then you were never truly broken, just wounded, healing." "You helped me believe that," Eleanor said, "when no one else did, when I couldn't believe it myself." "And you did the same for me," Isaiah reminded her. "My nightmares stopped after we married. Did you know that?" Eleanor looked up at him in surprise. "I noticed they became less frequent, but I didn't realize they'd stopped completely." "The night James was born," Isaiah confirmed. "Haven't had one since." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter as James chased his sister around the old oak tree. Shadow, now aging gracefully, watched from his special paddock near the house, occasionally nickering at the children's antics. "We've built something good here," Eleanor said, contentment evident in her voice. "Something that will last," Isaiah agreed, "for them and their children after them." "From broken pieces," Eleanor mused, "to something stronger than before," Isaiah finished. That's the way of things, I suppose. Break something, put it back together properly, and the mended places become the strongest parts. Eleanor smiled up at her husband, the love of her life, the man who had seen value in her when she couldn't see it in herself. "I love you, Isaiah Ingram," she said, "with every piece of me mended and whole." "And I love you, Eleanor Ingram," he replied, bending to kiss her softly. Every single piece. In the yard their children laughed. In the distance cattle lowed. And in their hearts the broken places had long since healed, forming something stronger, more beautiful, and more enduring than either could have imagined possible.